Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 81 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at PSCU. As the nation's premier payments CUSO, PSCU proudly supports the success of more than 1,500 credit unions. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Mark Alguard. Mark is the president and director of client strategy at Momentum. I've had a few emails recently from CEOs around Credit Union Land asking about what's going on with branches and HQ space and, quite honestly, just space in general. How will this global pandemic and more remote work change the way credit unions look, even as we get back to a more, doing air quotes here, normal world? This has been a hot topic of conversation the past few months, so I knew just the guy to go to. Mark, we talked about what Mark and his team at Momentum are seeing on the ground, what credit unions need to do in the short term, and what the long-term trends they're seeing also. We talked a lot about the member experience and how the expectation of the credit union may be changing, what people are expecting from all of us. Also, what do we need to do to stay competitive in the future with so much change and disruption in our space? I really did appreciate how open Mark was to share his learned experiences in the leadership and life hacks portion of the show. We even talked about getting away from the day-to-day with some high-altitude hiking. Not something I can say I've done a lot of. And as always, we had some fun with the rapid-fire questions to wrap up the show. There was a lot in this conversation that I think you can use in both the short-term and long-term planning for your credit union. So, without further ado, I give you my conversation with Mark Alguard. Enjoy. Mark, welcome to the show.
How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing well. Interesting times we are living in, but it gives us a lot to talk about. So I appreciate you taking the time today.
Of course. Thanks.
Let's just jump into it. One of the reasons that I'd been looking forward to having you on the show is because of these interesting times we're talking about. You being in the design build business, between social distancing for the foreseeable future and more people moving to remote work.
Right.
What are the most pressing issues, I guess, you guys are hearing from credit unions, in branch and HQ design? And
sure. From what we're hearing, kind of two very different situations. So I'll talk about them a little differently. And I think largely because I think the exposure to COVID is probably different in those different environments for sure. So I think like the challenge right now in the headquarters is to find a way to sync back up the work from home with the priorities and strategies I think credit unions already had around having a centralized workplace, right? So I think people are finding that working from home in a lot of ways is a good thing. People are enjoying the experience in a lot of areas. They're finding it easier to focus on cognitive tasks. They like the privacy for their phone calls. A lot of people are actually enjoying the video conferencing, the shorter commute, right? So a lot of benefits, but then there's also, I think, some drawbacks as well that are surfacing. Maybe harder to engage, right, with the mission of the organization, just feeling socially disconnected, maybe harder to reinforce the culture of the credit union, probably difficulties in onboarding new team members, difficulties in recruiting. Management can be hard at that level, especially for kind of your frontline managers, right? So benefits and drawbacks. And I think the challenge now is to maybe find a way to go back to a new normal and still have those benefits of working from home without losing what you were kind of seeking from this centralized workplace. And so I'll state that challenge in a different way. So you need to, I believe, go out and ask your team members what is working well and what they need in their workplace. And what you're going to largely get are responses that have to do with a person's own individual experience or productivity. It's going to be about what they're working on in that moment, but what they're missing out on or what they're not doing is not going to be as clear, or they're not going to be as present to it, right? So if people are not connecting, they may not be innovating. It may be impacting recruiting, and people are just not going to be as aware of that. So you need to make sure that you set maybe your individual biases aside, thinking about what's good for the overall organization, so you don't lose out on that, right? I think those are important things we don't want to forget. So,
I've heard from multiple credit union CEOs who have done surveys of their organizations, and the two that I'm thinking of are both larger credit unions, so lots of employees, and they found that people want a little of both, right? They like the flexibility of home.
Yeah.
But they really want to be back in the office too a few days a week, right? And a lot of it has been that connection and just even the brainstorming and everything of that nature. I hadn't thought about the innovation side, but you nailed that too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think folks are just going to need to pause. We just go slow in making long-term decisions that might be hard to unwind, right? Going over in one direction or another. And so you can't find a way to get the best of both worlds. I really think you can. So that's the headquarters.
And then branches, what are you seeing there? I mean,
branches, I think it's really in retail, right? It's all about exposure from, perhaps dozens of different people in the community every day for your frontline employees. And so, absolutely. Of course, we're seeing engineering controls or tools, the masks, the plexiglass, the tape on the floor, right? And we're really, I think, having to rely on the judgment of the local, jurisdictions, right? The government of what they're going to allow. And then you have to really rely on the community and your staff, right, to uphold those rules as best as they can. Aside from that, really what I'm seeing is a conversation kind of shifting again, and even more towards the branch being about the experience and about connecting to your brand, right, than it is about the transaction. And so really maybe just a acceleration of a trend that we certainly already saw. So what I'm not seeing at all, and we're actually, it's funny, we have quite a few branch planning projects that have surfaced during this time. And I think a consistent theme is that we're not talking about, sealed environments where people have barriers between each other. We're really talking more about open environments, but a changed purpose and reason for being in the branch.
That's really interesting, because that was a question that I had. I've seen some of the amazing designs that you guys have done over the past few years. And, it was away from that teller line and the wall to these more open concept, the branch is more than just a branch, I guess. So I was wondering, I'm like, wow, are people just reverting backwards now and saying we need a wall? But that's not what you're seeing. I mean, that's good.
I think what we're seeing are like the same protective barriers, and I'll call them ad hoc, but the tools that we're seeing placed in grocery stores and restaurants and other retail businesses, I think we're seeing that happen in the retail banking as well. I don't believe that they're going to be permanent fixtures, right?
Yeah.
But there's going to be other, I think medium-term strategies that probably have a lot more to do with operations, guiding the branch, right? Scheduling appointments, perhaps taking temperatures, other things, right, that go along with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard some amazing stories where they've said even after the COVID's gone, like this idea of scheduling appointments is going to stay, where, people can run on their lunch hour and actually know they can sit down and get back or do a Zoom. Yeah. So there will be some benefits. Do you think that this will change the way that members interact with the credit union, going forward?
Yeah, I have to believe so. I think that, proportionally, percentage-wise, right, people on the whole who were used to or they preferred to conduct a transaction in branch, that they were able to connect over a piece of technology. They've learned how to do that on the technology. And a certain percentage of those people are going to now value that convenience over their previous preference of going into the branch, right? Absolutely. So I think on the whole that is going to be a change.
Something and my guess is you're going to get a lot of questions about this, because I can tell you over the past month, I've actually had people reaching out to me that saying, do you have any branch people or, facilities type coming on the show, because people are talking about it, right? So I think after the podcast, you'll probably get a bunch of emails. But the question that I had was, a lot of credit unions are either pushing up their planning or they're moving into their planning season. Sure. Is there something, you kind of mentioned not swinging that pendulum too far, but is there something that you think all of them should be thinking about, not only for the next, say, year, but is there something that you think even going forward over the next few years that they need to be thinking about and planning for today?
Oh gosh, yeah. So I think at first, what they need to be thinking about is how they approach new technologies, because they are about to get overwhelmed and have the doors beaten down by, I think, internal staff and external vendors, partners, trying to bring new technologies to the credit union to help them in this time. And people have, good intentions with this help, but it's going to be to the point where I think the technology is driving the strategy instead of the strategy driving the technology. So, I can see that in HR tools, in productivity measuring tools, IT, again, monitoring people's health or where they are, the contacts they've had, engineering controls in buildings, touchless technology, sensors that know where people are, who they've interacted with. So many technologies, right? So be thinking about what your problems are and what you need to solve. And when your staff start to bring you these solutions, send them back if they don't have a really, good business case for them, right?
I think that is a great piece of advice, because when it first came on, everybody had to act very quickly to get up and running. You kind of hear everybody talking about from 6 months now to 6 days, but as we move forward into whatever that new normal looks like, to make sure that we're still being strategic, that's something that, quite honestly, we're not hearing a lot about recently. So,
like just 2 days ago in the New York Times, there was an article predicting a multi-billion-dollar industry just around new technologies for the workplace, right? Yeah. So you can only imagine what's coming their way.
You'll have to send me that article so we can link to it in the show notes.
It's a great one. It's a great one. I'll add one other piece of advice that maybe is a little more actionable for the leadership in their planning phase. Just keep in mind the amount of time it does take in the facilities planning process, because it's the planning process that you really can't shorten without having really large detrimental impact to your end product or your end strategy, right? So typically a new facility project can take 8 months to plan and get to construction at the minimum, and often up to more like 2 years, right? So I think that there are certainly one of the biggest challenges our clients have had in the last couple years hasn't been in finding the markets they want to be in. It's in finding the real estate in the markets that they want to be in. All the good retail locations are just all taken and they can't find them. To make, light of a bad situation, there are going to be really opportune locations available in markets that folks want to be in. And so you want to be in a position to act on those locations, right? And so if you don't do the planning work, you likely will not be able to act 6-8 months from now
when something opens up. That's great advice. Is there anything you think that credit unions, and this is a question I ask everybody, need to do different to stay relevant in this fast changing financial services industry?
I was thinking about this. I hate to give you a reverse answer, but I kind of think they need to do what they do well, just as well. So credit unions are really good at differentiating on being local, on being on the safe side of the table as their members, as being part of the community, as caring, right? Having a mission that's above and beyond just the bottom line, right? And so I think that in times like these, that's what people are looking for, is that type of partner in such an important area of their financial life. And I'm guessing I don't even need to be telling anyone listening to this podcast this, but that is truly my belief. And if there's anything maybe they could change, it would be to really think deeper about the branch as an experience, right? You really are going to need to be creating an experience that gives members in the community a reason to want to go into the branch, right? So that they can then connect with you on this kind of deeper level around your brand and that member, that person's own identity, right? Have a deeper, tangible connection.
Yep, that's true. I was asked recently, about the credit union value proposition, and that was one of the like that connection point was something that was a big part of the conversation. So I tend to agree. Last question in this section. If we were to sit down a year from now, what are you most proud of that you and the team at Momentum have accomplished? Like break out that crystal ball in a world that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay. So most proud may not be the biggest crystal ball answer, but honestly, a year from now, when we deliver the projects that we're committed to delivering on time and in a safe way without people getting sick, I'm really proud of and going to be proud of our team. And I'll tell you why. They are on the phone every day with vendors checking on the supply chain right now, making sure materials aren't delayed. They're with subcontractors learning about crews that are sick and then helping them find different crews. They're talking to the owners and helping them, resolve issues that they see or fear, trepidation they have. A huge thing is in enforcing the rules on our job sites when, subcontractors and labor, construction laborers, they're just an independent bunch. And, sometimes they don't want to be told what to do. And so it's a challenge in making sure that the rules are followed on the site. And I'm proud of them because it's a lot of work and they're doing a good job of it.
It sounds like it. To move on to the second part of the show, the leadership and the life hacks,
Sure.
What inspired you to take the gig? You're the president of Momentum.
It was serendipitous. I love business. I really enjoy organizational management. So anything that has to do with teams working together in a business. I really love built environment and construction. And so I lucked out, I have to say, to have those things kind of come together in the same, organization, right? The business and the construction, the design, and the partners that we work with. It's been awesome.
How has the inspiration changed since you've taken over that role, the leadership role?
So it's only, I've been in this position for a year, and I think the biggest change has been exiting.
Here's a global pandemic for you, right? We're going to test you early.
Right. Yeah, definitely doing some stress tests and financial forecasts. And as an aside, there was this period of a couple of months of just working up pure adrenaline, and then the kind of swing back away from that was hard. A lot of people in my organization talked about this, like just we didn't have the adrenaline to work off of anymore, right? So to go back to the norm or the new norm's been tough, but we're back finally. Yeah, I'd say the biggest, shift in the inspiration, I think that was the question, was just around, honestly, the first few months, almost a feeling of, anxiety or terror, right? Of the new responsibility. And it's actually been kind of exciting now as I'm starting to see the work we've done around scaling take hold, that I'm now more inspired to scale a bit larger, right? And to grow a bit faster than I thought I would be at this point. So that's exciting, especially to say that now, mid-pandemic, right?
Is there something that your team has heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
I thought about this for a while, and I'm stealing this from one of our key players, but it's the saying, "My part went well." It's an inside joke we have. One of our team members had another team member in the past, when asked how the presentation went with the client, his response was, "Well, I thought my part went well." And it's just so antithetical to how we work, right? Yeah. Because who cares how your part went? It's how the whole part went. So everyone knows if I'm about to say that when I do, and I did take that from Bob Saunders, one of our founders. But it's such a true. It just connects to our culture really well. In an opposite sort of way.
Yep, I love that. I'm a fan of Bob's as well. He's one of only a couple people back when we actually had an office in Greenville, South Carolina, who just stopped through one day coming by.
Yeah,
so
I remember that. I think I was on a video call with you guys.
I think we might have been. Yeah, it was
cool. Yeah, I remember that.
That was something. Yeah, I know. I'm a Bob fan. So I'm assuming this has come up recently, but you mentioned, being a year into the gig now. Mm-hmm. Sometimes as that leader, you have to make the difficult decision. Yeah. And it might not be the popular one, right away or in the short term. Is that something you've always had the ability to do? Is it something you've had to kind of cultivate in yourself over your career?
oh, definitely something you have to practice and cultivate for sure. And I think to start with, it's like deciphering or making a distinction between a rash decision, right? Or maybe something that's urgent but not that important, and a really truly important decision, right? So to have the discipline and the time to really think the decision through and have the evidence, right? And then once you've thought it through and you have the evidence and you're convinced that your decision is supported by your values, then it's not nearly as hard, right? And you don't have to be as afraid of issuing it. But then you wouldn't label it a difficult decision if it wasn't difficult. So it always will be difficult, but usually accept it, right? You know your team members are going to back you up when you make it.
It sounds like you like to bring your team members along in that decision.
For sure. I mean, as much as you can, right? Otherwise, how do you have the support for it?
Absolutely. Sure. Is there a common myth about a leader or being a good leader that you just want to debunk?
Maybe, everyone's different, but the aloof leader, that you need to be aloof or kind of separate from the team. I just don't get that, and you actually will read that quite a bit, even in great publications like HBR does talk about this, right? Being really careful about your, personal relationships, friendships, even with your team members. And, I certainly don't think we should be like Michael Scott, right? From The Office. Right. Of course that's crossing a line, but to have friendships, right, is a good thing, I think, in the workplace. And so you just have to have the self-awareness to know where the right boundary is, but you don't need to be aloof.
Right. I'm with you there. When you think back to earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made, or that mistake you see all kind of young leaders make?
It's so obvious to me. I don't know if it is obvious to everyone else, but it's just that fear of sounding dumb and coupled with the protective shield of email, right? So, this thought that you fire off the email, okay, problem solved. Well, no, you just fired off an email. So a fear of like getting on the phone and having a conversation that you might not quite understand everything you're talking about, but just getting out there and making yourself, I think, vulnerable. Man, I had a first boss he could be kind of a jerk in like the perfect way. And he really taught me how to not hide behind email and be afraid to ask questions, right?
It's such an interesting thing. I've noticed, and I'm going to be like the old guy here or something. I'm a Gen Xer, almost 46 years old. But I found that some of the younger people coming up now haven't had that verbal communication as much, because it was like text and whatever, and where we made phone calls. That's what, like, early in the career, that you didn't really use email. You just made phone calls. So you had those conversations. I'm wondering now with FaceTime and everything else, if that's going to change for this next group where they're used to talking again. So
I hadn't thought about that. That would be pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's something I don't know why I've thought about that, but maybe it's a younger workforce or work staff at CUInsight for over the past decade, but everybody learns. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you've received that you find yourself going back to, over and over again in your career?
Yeah, almost a cliche, but if it's worth it, it's going to take time, right? So there are no sitcom problems, and anything that's really worth doing could take months or even years, right, to get it to where you want. It just takes hard work, right? Things don't come easy. It's grit, right? To really be okay with being in the problem and in the face of a problem without a solution. And that's really uncomfortable. And to be in that place for an extended amount of time, and then to create your own path to the solution, and rather than thinking that there's going to be a prescribed path to getting where you want to go, right?
Yeah, that's good stuff. One of the things, and you mentioned a previous boss, so maybe it's him, but I noticed during the first season was how many people brought up mentors.
Yeah.
So did you have mentors who kind of helped shape you into the leader that you are today?
Well, I think there's, certainly figures in my life, family members for sure, who have, I think, kind of instilled that maybe sense of grit, maybe a sense of empathy as well, openness and empathy. But specifically one I talk about is I'm in a group called Vistage, which you may have heard of. It's a kind of like a board, an advisory board of peers, people in small businesses or leadership roles. And so they've been really a big help for me in making some pretty big decisions over the years. In fact, I wouldn't be in this job if I hadn't been on that, in that group, right?
Have you found, 'cause I noticed this is something that I've found, is like sometimes getting outside the bubble and having that group that's not in the same business as you or the same industry is really helpful in the way they could. I even remember Maurice Smith when he was on the podcast talking about he liked to talk to his dad, who was a farmer, about he was out of the credit unions, right? So
absolutely critical, right? That the biases that can show up when you only stick to your cohort, right? You need to shine a light on that. And so the other perspectives are huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. Inside or outside of credit unions, has there been that moment of accomplishment that you kind of, when you look back, you're like, nailed it? It just kind of makes you smile still thinking about it?
Yeah, it was this, I think there was one moment I was doing a workplace strategy for a credit union, large credit union, about 6 or 7 years ago. And it required me to facilitate a leadership session for 3 days straight with about 20 leaders, including the CEO and, key executives, and to hold their attention for 3 days straight. The first time I'd really ever done something like that. It was awesome. I just was so thrilled with how it went. And it really has, been something I've been able to build upon ever since then.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, holding anybody's attention for 3 days is something.
I had the team, right? I was facilitating a whole workshop and whatnot, but I think that's part of it too. Maybe was having the team, right, and kind of working with the team to do that. That gives me juice. So
yeah, that's cool. Before we move on to the last part of the show, if you have a free day, nothing on the calendar, right? What passions do you have outside of credit unions? What does Mark do to recharge or?
Up in the Cascades or the Olympics. Yeah. That's my cathedral. I will be up in North Cascades National Park tomorrow doing some high altitude hiking. Hopefully the snow's melted enough. I think it will be, but we'll find out. I might get my feet a little wet, but.
No kidding. So do you go, overnight, that type of thing, or is it a day trip?
Yeah, more day hikes, but certainly overnight when we can. It's a challenge to get, when you're in a pretty dense area like Seattle, it's hard to backpack around here without kind of being a little too crowded. But, you can drive a little farther and find that out on the Olympic Peninsula a couple times in the summer. Yeah.
So for someone who's not as experienced in hiking, besides just, a couple mile trail, what is high altitude hiking? What classifies that?
So around here, it's not super high. So the trailhead will probably be about 1,000 feet. And I think tomorrow I'm trying to go up to about 6,000 feet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, but around here, the mountains kind of start almost at sea level and they peak out about 14,000 feet. So I'll probably hit the snow level around 5,000 feet tomorrow is my guess.
That is pretty cool. Last part of the show, the rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid. Your answers do not have to be.
Okay.
So, what were you like in high school? And do you remember the first time you got in memorable trouble?
Oh, gosh. I think I had the same struggles as in high school as most others. Is trying to fit in and, maybe a bit of an underachiever at times, right? Definitely more worried about the social calendar than the academic calendar.
I was with you.
Yeah. And that is, that's one of those things you look back on. I wish I could, smack myself a little bit and get me to wake up to what I was doing. But, that's life. Getting in trouble. I was naughty, but not too naughty. So, okay. Yeah, I don't have any real great stories around this, but yeah.
I asked the question because once in a while we get surprised, and they're funny. Most of us stumbled into the careers that we're in one way or another. Back in high school, what'd you want to be when you grew up?
A businessman.
Did you really?
Oh yeah. I've always loved business. And so I'm there, I think, in some sort of way. Right.
That's awesome. Is that what you went to school for also? Or?
Yeah, I was in the business school at University of Washington.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any daily routines that if you just don't do them, that your day feels off?
I have daily routines that kind of shift over time. So I don't know if I'd say the day feels off. Right now, one thing I cherish about being in Seattle at this northern climate is how or latitude, sorry, not northern climate, just how early the sun rises every morning. So right now it's going outside and just kind of sitting in silence early, really early while it's still cool and just getting light out without a cup of coffee, even just, it's somewhat meditative, but it's not not an actual meditation.
I was going to ask if is that a meditation practice?
I do meditate, but for me, I find the most value in the middle of the day than at the beginning of the day.
Do you really? I struggle coming back to it. Like if I don't do it first thing, I have not got that discipline yet to come back to it, even when I tell myself I'm going to, which is probably why I need it. It's probably why you get the most value from it then, right? So, because that's one of the things that if I skip that in the morning, it's one of those things that just makes me feel off. Like I missed something today. So, yeah. The random question: what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Oh my gosh, Neutral Milk Hotel in the Airplane Over the Sea is my all-time favorite. I don't know if you've heard it, but I just love it.
I have not heard it, and that is a first for the show, so I love it. So I will have to look it up.
It's loosely based on the Diary of Anne Frank, and it's angsty rock, and it's really great. It was way before its time.
I am intrigued. Yeah. So I'm a reader. Jill and I have a stack of books in the house, and many of them have been recommended to us on the show. And it just keeps growing. So do you have any books that either you've gifted others or that book that you just think everybody should read?
I absolutely love David Copperfield, Charles Dickens. I've tried to get people to read it. I don't know if anyone I've tried to get to read it has actually read it. That kind of 19th century English literature can get a little flowery and dense for people, but it is just such an awesome, righteous coming of age story. And then, this person who is wronged is able to, get what is right, and others get their just desserts. And, Dickens has these amazing, crazy characters that, leap off the page. And if you watch the miniseries on BBC, you totally recognize them from the book. They're exactly the same. So it's a brilliant, of course, right? Dickens, right? He's brilliant.
Absolutely. I love it. Maybe somebody's going to pick it up. So who hasn't read it before? As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question, what's become less important?
Well, the less is easy. It's like looking good, appearances. It's like, why do you spend so much of your life caring what others think about you? I do not know. Thank God that I'm not so worried about that anymore. More important, definitely family, right? Spending time and being with family. Again, at my age, and my grandparents are gone, and I was really close with them when I was younger, I can't help but wish I had recognized how awesome they were even more back then and spent more time with them. So
that is true. Yeah. If we were lucky enough to have them around.
Right.
It's a shame we got them when we were so young and had other stuff entertaining us, right? So there's a question that I don't send. When you hear the word success, who is the first person who comes to mind?
Okay. The first person who came to mind is Monty Don. And I have no reason why. Do you know who Monty Don is?
I don't even know who that is. No.
He is an English gardener who's famous on BBC for having these amazing, he has a show called Big Dreams, Little Spaces, where he helps people improve their backyard garden. And I love gardening. So I guess subconsciously, that's who I want to be, is Monty Don.
I will tell you, that's one of my favorite questions to ask, because everybody defines success differently. When I was on the show, I talked about this guy who, because I like to scuba dive. When I flipped the script and I had to answer these questions, but it was this guy named Ted down in Roatan who was cataloging turtles, not for anyone else but himself underwater. And I'm like, Ted was just so happy. That seems successful, So I love that yours was, it's like the guy who gardens, right, and helps people garden.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Look, Mark, thank you again so much for being on the show. The last question I have for you, do you have any final asks of our listeners today, or final thoughts that you'd like to share?
Yes. There is nothing divisive about wearing a mask.
It's keep having that same conversation. That's not a political statement.
It's just happens to be where we are in this whole thing. We had that record high cases yesterday, and I hope people can, set aside some of their, political beliefs and we can continue to work together, right? And get over this pandemic.
I second you on that as well. So we will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. What's the best way for people to reach you if they have additional questions of you? I know a lot of people are talking about.
Probably LinkedIn is the best way to, easiest way to find me, or on our Momentum website, for sure.
We will link to both of those so they can get a hold of you. And Mark, again, thank you very much for taking the time today. I hope you stay healthy and have an amazing day.
Thank you. You too. Appreciate it.
Before we go, I just need to give you all a big old thank you for listening. We appreciate the support. We could not do this without you. Once again, I'd like to thank Mark for taking the time out of his busy schedule to share his experience with us, all of us today. And a big thank you to our sponsor, PSCU. Our friends at PSCU have been a longtime partner and supporter of ours, so please make sure to click on their links in the show notes, give them some love, see everything they have going on to help the credit union community. We're also on all the podcast players out there: Apple, Spotify, Pandora, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're there. If you could, subscribe, maybe even leave us a 5-star rating and a review on the old Apple podcast machine. It helps with the visibility of the show. If you don't happen to think we're worth the 5 stars, forget that I even asked. Just reach out to me directly and let me know where we can improve. And don't forget about the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. Need some stimulation for the mind? We've got you covered. Get your next book recommendation from Mark and all the past guests on the show. Thank you all again so much for listening. Have a great day and stay healthy out there, friends.